Throughout the Gospel of John, we see Jesus make 7 I am statements. And these statements describe who he is and what he came to do. And these statements are both surprising and encouraging. And so I want to look at each of these statements because I think they have an incredibly powerful application in our lives and our faith. They will help us understand who Jesus is and what he wants to do in our lives. Let's take a look. I want to start by looking at the statement, I am, because this is a phrase that God uses all throughout the Bible when he describes himself. And the first time that we find God use the phrase, I am, is in Exodus chapter 3. And it's when he's sending Moses to Pharaoh to demand that Pharaoh let God's people go. And Moses is understandably nervous. He's going before the most powerful person in the world at that time. And to reassure him, God says to Moses, say that I am sent you. Now, before this, God's people had simply called God by Elohim, which was more of a title than a name. But here God is giving his people a personal name. I am. And this is showing the significance and the power of who God is, that he is in all things, he has created all things, he is before all things, and he will exist after all things. This is a personalized name that ends up being used over 300 times throughout the entire Bible. I am is a statement that he is God. And when Jesus uses this term, both here in John and elsewhere, he is saying that he is not just some normal person. He's not just a good teacher. He's claiming to be God in flesh. And what Jesus does in these 7 I am statements is he puts some words on the end of this to further reveal who he is, to show us his nature, to show us how he cares for us. And so what I want to do in this video is I want to break down each of these I am statements to see what they can teach us about who God is. We find the first I am statement in John 6:35, where Jesus says, I am the bread of life. And it's no mistake that Jesus uses this illustration here because he just fed 5,000 people with a few loaves of bread and a few fish. Now, even today, that miracle would be impressive, but it was even more impressive in Jesus' day because food was scarce. And Jesus had just made an abundance of food out of almost nothing. But what Jesus is trying to communicate to this crowd is that really what he has for them is more than just physical bread. He doesn't want to just solve their physical hunger. He wants to meet their spiritual hunger as well. And he's trying to show them. He's trying to show them that what he has for them is greater than food. Is greater than this thing that sustains life in them, that he can sustain something so much more. You see, in the Old Testament, we see God provide manna from heaven for his people. And in the New Testament, Jesus himself, God himself, comes to be the eternal food, the bread of heaven, that if you eat from, you will be spiritually satisfied because he is the bread of life. In John 8:12, Jesus says, I am the light of the world. And just as food was scarce in the ancient world, light was scarce too. I mean, we take for granted today that we can just flip on a switch and we instantly have light. But it wasn't that way 2,000 years ago. It got dark at night and you would stumble around trying to find your way. So it's a big deal when Jesus says, I came to provide light. And what's even more interesting is that Jesus said this during the Feast of the Tabernacles, in which the Jews would light this giant candelabra as a symbol of God guiding their ancestors through the desert. And what Jesus is saying, he's saying, I am that light. I am here to guide you through this world. And the reality is the world we live in is darkened by sin. And we're just stumbling through. We can't see where we are going. And what Jesus is saying, he's saying, I will be your light. You don't need to stumble. You don't need to wander in the darkness because I will light it up for you. Jesus is the light of our lives. In a dark and a broken and a hurting world, Jesus' light shines bright. The third I am statement comes from John 10:7, where Jesus says, I am a gate for the sheep. And now this is kind of leading into an illustration where Jesus is saying, I'm a good shepherd. And a shepherd's job was to protect and to guide and to care for his sheep. And this was supposed to be the role of the religious leaders in Jesus' day. But they weren't really doing a great job at that. Instead, they were taking advantage of their people. Rather than caring for and protecting and guiding, they were using these people to gain more power and influence. And Jesus is using this I am statement to show them the error in their ways and to contrast himself to the religious leaders. Now, we kind of don't really understand what a shepherd is, at least in the Western culture, because it's not really a job that people have anymore, at least not in the same way. And so I want to give you a better understanding of what a shepherd would have done in Jesus' day. And for that, we're going to turn to Mark more. He says this: shepherds often functioned as a door to the sheep pen. When the sheep came into the fold at night, they would pass the shepherd one at a time. He would examine each of them for cuts and abrasions. If necessary, he would treat them with oil to prevent infection. Then, when the whole flock was in, he would lay himself in the front of the opening of the pen. When Jesus says that he is the gate for his sheep, he's showing us how he protects us, how he counts us one by one, how he notices when one of us is missing, and how he puts himself in harm's way so that we can experience true rest. He is the gate so that you and I can experience the life that he has for us. Just a few verses later in the same illustration in John 10:11, Jesus says, I am the good shepherd. I am the good shepherd. And he's building off this idea that he provides, protects, and cares for his people. He's the good shepherd. And if we were to look through this entire passage, here's some of the characteristics that we would see God doing for his people. The good shepherd, he lays down his life for his sheep. He protects his sheep from attacks. He will not abandon his sheep. He cares for his sheep. He searches for his sheep who are lost and brings them back. He knows his sheep, and he loves his sheep. Jesus is the good shepherd because he cares for us, sometimes at great cost to himself. He knows who you are. He protects you. He provides for you. He meets your needs. And he knows when you are gone and will go out of his way to bring you back. Jesus is the good shepherd. We find the fifth I am statement in John 11:25, where Jesus says, I am the resurrection of life. And what's happening surrounding this verse is that Jesus' friend Lazarus has just died. And now Jesus is there comforting his sister, and he's saying, I am the resurrection of life. He's giving hope in the middle of a desperate situation. And he's giving hope to Lazarus' family that he can provide, that death doesn't have a hold on him. But Jesus doesn't just say these words. He backs it up. A few verses later, Jesus raises Lazarus from the grave, proving that this I am statement isn't just words, it's truth. That he is the resurrection of life, and even death doesn't have a hold on him. And what this teaches us today is that death isn't the final answer for us, because Jesus has defeated death once and for all. And all of us who choose to follow him will be resurrected and spend eternity with him, because he is the resurrection of life. The sixth I am statement is found in John 14:6, where Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And this comes in response to some of the disciples being kind of confused about what Jesus is saying and what he's really about. And so Jesus clarifies. He's saying, I am the way. Notice the words here. Jesus isn't saying he's a way. He's not a source of life. He's not a truth. He is the way, the truth, and the life. This is one of the most exclusive statements that Jesus makes. He's not leaving room for us to think that he's one of many ways to heaven, one of many ways to eternal life, one of many ways to peace and joy here on this earth. He's saying that he is the way, that if you want truth, you go to him. If you want to know the way to go in life, you go to him. If you want eternal life, you go to him. Apart from Jesus, what he's saying here is there is not those things. There is not capital T truth. There is not life. There is not a way that is guiding and directing people like he is, because he is the way, the truth, and the life. And nobody will get to the Father apart from Jesus. We find the final I am statement in John 15:1, where Jesus says, I am the true vine. And Jesus says these words to his disciples on the night that he is going to be arrested, tried, and crucified. And he's trying to encourage his followers to stay connected to him. You see, every good gardener knows a few important principles. And one is, if you want a branch to grow, if you want a branch to produce fruit, you can't cut it off from the source. I know that seems obvious to us, right? Like if you cut a branch off, it's not going to produce fruit anymore. But what Jesus is saying is more important than just a gardening principle. What he's saying is he's saying you need to stay attached to the source of life. Remember the previous I am statement. He is the way, the truth, and the life. And so if you want life flowing in your life, in your faith, you have to keep your branch connected to his vine. Further, if you go back to this gardening illustration, you also have to tend to the plants in your garden if you want them to grow. In other words, we have to tend to our life, our faith. If we want to grow and produce fruit in and through us, not only do we have to stay connected to the source, but we also have to manage our branch. And what Jesus is encouraging us to do is to stay connected to the source and to put effort into our faith. And if we do that, God is the gardener. He will tend to us and care for us, and we will produce much fruit. This means he will produce in us the fruit of the Spirit, of love, of joy, of peace, of patience, of kindness, of goodness, of self-control. He will produce these things in us if we stay connected to him. Jesus' 7 I am statements teach us not only about who God is and his nature, but how he views us. What we can see in these statements is God's heart for us. He cares for us. He wants to protect us. He wants to provide for us. He wants to produce something good in us. He wants to guide us. He wants what's best for us. These 7 I am statements reveal that God cares about you. And he wants what's best for you. And my challenge for you would be to take these I am statements and to dwell on them, to pray about them, to look a little closer at them and see what God has for you in them. Maybe for the next week, you take one of these a day and you just read through it a few times. You pray for it a few times. Maybe you write it on a note card or set a reminder in your phone to go off periodically throughout the day to remind yourself to examine what does God have for you in these statements. Because I believe God has something incredible for you. And these I am statements reveal to us who he is and what he wants for you. So take some time. Read through these, pray through these, and see what God has for you. Thank you for watching this video. I hope that it challenged and encouraged you by what Jesus has for you. If it did, would you leave a comment down below letting me know your thoughts? And then also, don't forget to subscribe to this channel so that you can stay up to date on future content that's coming out. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.